The lunar citadel stretched into the sky like a mountain carved from silver stone, its towers glimmering under the pale light of twin moons. Every year the citadel came alive with a ritual older than memory, the mating ceremony. Nobles, warriors, and heirs from across the kingdoms gathered to pledge allegiance, demonstrate their strength, and offer themselves to the judgment of the Alpha King. Yet, amidst the grandeur and spectacle, a single figure remained apart, unnoticed and alone. Elira sat on the marble steps of the ceremonial dais, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She was noble by birth, but her family had fallen from prominence, and rumors whispered that she was fragile, unremarkable, and unworthy of notice. The hall buzzed with anticipation, nobles exchanging smiles, glances, and veiled challenges. Elira felt their eyes, yet somehow she remained unseen, a shadow among glittering forms. The air carried the scent of incense, sharp and sweet, mingling with the faint metallic tang of magic that pulsed invisibly beneath the stones. The ceremonial torches blazed in silvered holders, casting long dancing shadows across the polished floor. Elira's pulse quickened as the music of the ceremony swelled, a haunting melody of flutes and drums echoing with centuries of tradition. Couples began to parade before the dais, their movements precise and elegant. The king's advisors whispered praises and critiques, eyes sharp and calculating. Elira watched them, but she did not move. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down, suffocating in its subtlety. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and longing. She wanted to belong, to be seen. Yet every instinct warned her that stepping forward might bring humiliation or worse. And then, the ground trembled. It was not the drums, not the movement of the crowd. The citadel itself seemed to shiver under the weight of someone approaching, slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. All eyes turned toward the great double doors of the hall, where a shadow fell before the twin moons. King Tharion entered. He was enormous, his presence a mountain of power. Even among the tallest warriors and the grandest nobles, he towered, his movements precise and terrifyingly graceful. His eyes were a storm of gray, sharp as thunder, and they scanned the hall as if peeling away masks and secrets alike. When his gaze fell upon Elira, something shifted in the room. Murmurs fell silent. The air grew thick with tension, and Elira felt her breath catch. The giant Alpha King approached her slowly, each step shaking the floor, commanding attention without a word. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. He stopped a mere 2 paces away, towering above her like a god carved from stone and shadow. Then his voice came, low and resonant, carrying across the silent hall like a tide. "Act like you're mine," he said. The words struck her like lightning. Every noble, every guest froze in place. Some gasped, others dared not look away. Elira's mind raced, caught between shock and disbelief. She had been invisible, ignored, dismissed, and now the most powerful figure in the kingdom had singled her out. Elira's legs trembled, her mind screamed in protest. How could she act as if she belonged to him? She barely understood herself, let alone the strange, magnetic pull of this king, who seemed carved from both shadow and fire. Yet the weight of his command was not just social. It carried power, deep and ancient, bound in magic older than the citadel itself. Refusal was not merely shame. It could bring ruin, even death. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Tharion's gray eyes held her with unyielding intensity, studying her as if trying to see inside her very soul. For the first time, she felt something that was neither fear nor pride, a strange recognition, as though he had been waiting for her all his life, and she had unknowingly been walking toward him. With trembling hands, Elira rose. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and took a tentative step forward. The hall seemed to tilt around her, the music fading into a distant hum. Every eye followed her, some with curiosity, some with envy, some with thinly veiled malice. She could feel their judgment pressing against her, yet she did not falter. She had no choice but to obey, but the act of obedience did not feel like submission. It felt like the first step into a world she had never dared to enter. Tharian extended a massive hand, not in command but as a gesture of invitation. His touch was near her, yet restrained, as though testing the boundary between power and trust. Elira's fingers hovered just above his palm, a silent question passing between them. Then, slowly, she allowed herself to take it. The room seemed to hold its breath as the contact was made. A ripple of energy surged through her, cold and fierce, threading through her veins like fire bound in ice. She had felt strange currents before, whispers of magic, fleeting glimpses of latent ability, but never anything like this. She realized with a shiver that Tharian's command had awakened something in her that had lain dormant, hidden beneath layers of fear and doubt. The hall erupted into motion again, yet Elira and Tharian were momentarily alone in their shared intensity. Nobles and courtiers could not break the silent communion that passed between them. Every instinct screamed that their fates were now intertwined, bound by something deeper than ceremony or politics. But not all watched silently. From the edges of the hall, eyes gleamed with envy and malice. A rival noble, a distant cousin with ambitions older than the citadel itself, narrowed his gaze, lips curling in a thin smile. He had seen the same energy that pulsed through Elira, the same dangerous potential, and he knew that her rise could disrupt his carefully laid plans. Elira, sensing the subtle currents of danger, pulled back slightly. Tharian noticed and inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement of her fear. For the first time, she saw the weight of his own burden. Behind the mask of power and dominance lay a man trapped by duty, tradition, and a curse that demanded control. His eyes softened, not in weakness, but in shared understanding. The ceremony pressed on, and yet Elira could not tear her eyes from Tharian. He moved with the inevitability of a storm, commanding respect and fear with every motion. She felt small, fragile, yet in the same moment she felt the first stirrings of courage. She had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated, but here, under the twin moons and the watchful eyes of the kingdom, she was chosen. Not for her beauty, not for her lineage, but for something deeper, something unspoken. As the first phase of the ceremony drew to a close, Tharian released her hand, stepping back. The hall erupted with whispers, applause, and cautious curiosity. Elira's pulse thundered in her ears, a mixture of exhilaration and fear. She had survived the first step, but she knew this was only the beginning. The king's gaze lingered on her as he turned, not dismissing her, not ignoring her, but holding the promise of more, of challenge, of revelation, of a connection that could either elevate or destroy them both. Elira felt a chill run down her spine. This was no ordinary ceremony. She had stepped into a world where power, magic, and destiny collided, and the giant Alpha King at the center of it all had marked her as his own. And then, just as she dared to catch her breath, the floor beneath her feet shimmered faintly, a ripple of light, like moonlight dancing on water, emanating from her veins. The hall seemed to pause, and even Tharian's eyes widened slightly. Elira realized with a mixture of awe and terror that the power within her was awakening, responding to him in a way she could not yet control or understand. For the first time in her life, Elira felt the full weight of destiny pressing upon her. The mating ceremony was not just a test of allegiance or beauty, it was a reckoning, and she, the girl who had always sat alone, invisible and ignored, was at the very center of it. Her heart beat faster, her senses heightened, and she understood the unspoken truth. The giant Alpha King had not chosen her at random. Something ancient, something dangerous, and something impossibly powerful had drawn them together. The hall seemed to tilt, the torches flickering as if in acknowledgement of the shift. Whispers rose again, but Elira no longer heard them. Her gaze remained locked on Tharion, and she felt the spark of something that went beyond ceremony, tradition, or fear. A bond that would shape both their fates, for better or worse. The twin moons glinted through the high windows, and in that pale light, Elira realized she had no choice but to step fully into the role the king had given her, and into the unknown future that awaited them both. Cliffhanger. As the ceremony continued, a strange, cold energy surged through Elira, stronger than before. Tharion's eyes glimmered with something unreadable, a secret he had kept hidden even from himself. And in that moment, Elira understood. The bond between them had begun, and nothing in the kingdom, nor in the ancient magic that lingered in the citadel, could undo what had just been set into motion. The hall of the lunar citadel slowly emptied after the ceremony, the torches flickering in the dimming light as nobles and warriors retreated to their chambers. Yet Elira remained on the marble steps, her pulse still racing from the strange energy that had surged through her during the ceremony. She could feel it thrumming beneath her skin, a rhythm that seemed alive, as if it were reaching out to something, or someone. King Tharion had returned to his private chamber, but she sensed his presence even from across the hall. There was a weight in the air, heavy and magnetic, as if the very stones recognized the bond forged between them. For the first time, Elira understood that the ceremony had been more than a display of strength and loyalty. It had been a spark, and now that spark was growing. Slow, deliberate footsteps approached her. Elira turned, heart hammering, to see Tharion standing in the shadows at the top of the stairs. His enormous frame was softened slightly by the dim torchlight, revealing a side of him rarely glimpsed, the burden behind his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the faint tremor in his hands. "You felt it," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "The energy. It responded to you." Elira nodded, unsure what words could explain what had passed through her. "I felt it, strong and strange. I've never felt anything like it." Tharion descended the stairs slowly, as if crossing an invisible threshold of power. "Few can," he murmured. "And fewer still can control it. The bond the ceremony has created, it is not just ceremonial. It is ancient, tied to the magic of this citadel and to the bloodlines of those who serve here." Elira swallowed hard, realizing the weight of what she had stepped into. She had thought the ceremony was merely about appearances and alliances, but it was something far greater and far more dangerous. "Why me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why did you choose me?" Tharion's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Because you are not afraid to stand alone. You have strength hidden beneath your silence. Many would tremble, many would bow without spirit. You have spirit. And perhaps," he added quietly, "you can save me from what has haunted me for centuries." Elira felt a shiver run down her spine. Save him? She did not understand. Yet the vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable. The king, the alpha, the colossal figure who had dominated the hall with his presence. He was not untouchable. And somehow, that knowledge drew her closer, even as fear clung to her like a shadow. Before she could ask more, a voice echoed from the far side of the hall. A courtier, pale and cunning, stepped from the shadows. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing with exaggerated grace, "we should discuss the implications of your selection. Such a choice. Unusual." Tharian's gaze hardened, gray eyes narrowing. Unusual, yes, he said evenly, but necessary. The girl chosen is no mistake. He turned back to Elira. Come, you must learn what the bond requires. There are rules, and there are dangers you have yet to face. Elira followed him, each step through the citadel echoing in the cavernous halls. The walls themselves seemed to hum, resonating with a power that stirred her senses and tightened the bond she had felt during the ceremony. Tharian led her to a chamber she had never seen, a vast space lined with ancient tomes and artifacts glowing faintly with magic. This is the Hall of Ancients, Tharian said. Few are permitted here, and fewer still understand what resides within these walls. You are now part of it, whether you wish it or not. Elira's eyes widened. Scrolls and books floated in midair, their pages flipping as if guided by invisible hands. Crystals pulsed softly with energy, illuminating symbols that danced across the floor in silver patterns. She felt a strange resonance in her chest, as if her own heartbeat had begun to echo the rhythm of the magic surrounding her. What is all this? She whispered. Tharian approached a tall pedestal, resting a massive hand on a crystal that glowed like captured moonlight. The magic of our line, he said. It is old, ancient, and dangerous. I have carried it for centuries, bound by a curse that demands control, submission, and sacrifice. Until now, none could awaken the power without destroying themselves, or the kingdom. Elira's breath caught. And now, Tharian said, turning to her, you are bound to me, not by fear, but by choice. That bond has begun to awaken the power within you. If you learn to control it, if you embrace it, you may be the key to breaking the curse that has haunted my line for generations. A tremor ran through Elira. The ceremony had seemed terrifying enough, but now she understood the true weight of her role. This was not a mere display of allegiance. It was a responsibility that could change the fate of the kingdom and of Tharian himself. She glanced around the hall, absorbing the strange artifacts and the palpable energy in the air. Her hand brushed against one of the floating scrolls, and a surge of warmth shot through her arm, spreading quickly into her chest. She felt it, a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rhythm that pulsed with life and possibility. Tharian watched her closely. Do you feel it? He asked. I do, Elira said, her voice trembling. It's like it's alive. It is, Tharian said, his eyes intense. And it has chosen you. The bond we share now connects your strength to mine. Together, we may awaken what has been dormant for centuries, or we may destroy everything. Elira's mind swirled. She had spent her life feeling small, powerless, overlooked. And now, here she was, standing beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, tied to forces she barely understood. Fear battled with exhilaration, and somewhere in that battle, she felt the first flicker of courage. Before they could speak further, a soft knock echoed at the door. A messenger, young and wide-eyed, entered, holding a sealed scroll. Your Majesty, the messenger said, bowing. Urgent news from the Northern Watch. There are signs of rebellion, and reports of strange disturbances near the Citadel's outer wards. Tharian's jaw tightened. They have sensed the change, he said quietly, almost to himself. The awakening. It will draw attention, both wanted and unwanted. He looked at Elira. You must understand, danger is not just a possibility. It is inevitable, and you are at the center of it. Elira's stomach clenched. The ceremony had seemed like a test of courage and composure. Now it was clear it had been only the beginning. The real challenge, surviving the political intrigue, the magical dangers, and the enemies lurking in the shadows, had just begun. Yet even in the face of fear, Illyra felt a strange clarity. The bond with Tharion was no longer a mere obligation. It was a lifeline, a source of strength she had never known. And for the first time, she sensed that the power stirring within her could be more than a curse. It could be a force for change, for salvation, and perhaps even for love. Tharion stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as he spoke. The ceremony has bound us together, but it is only the first step. There are trials ahead, tests of strength, wisdom, and courage. You will be watched, challenged, and perhaps even feared. But remember this, you are not alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. Illyra nodded, though her heart still raced. She did not fully understand what lay ahead, but the truth of his words settled in her mind. She had been invisible for so long, yet now she stood in the center of a destiny that demanded everything from her, and promised everything in return. As the first stars appeared in the sky outside the towering windows, a sudden movement caught her eye. A figure cloaked in darkness slipped silently along the hall's edge, watching. Illyra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the realization that danger was already near. The bond had awakened her power, but it had also drawn attention, both hostile and curious. She turned to Tharion, who followed her gaze. His eyes darkened. "They are watching," he said. "Some will come for you. Some will try to take what we share, and some may try to destroy you to weaken me. You must be ready." Illyra swallowed, feeling the cold bite of anticipation. She had stepped into a world she did not fully understand, tied to a man whose power and burden dwarfed her own. Yet in that fear, there was a spark of resolve. She would not be a pawn. She would learn. She would fight. And perhaps in the process, she would awaken not only the magic within herself, but the strength to stand beside the king she was learning to trust. The night deepened, the citadel silent except for the faint hum of magic in the walls. Illyra could feel it. A pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat, a bond that whispered of power, destiny, and danger. Somewhere in the shadows, the cloaked figure watched still, waiting, planning, unaware that the girl they underestimated was awakening into something far greater than they imagined. Cliffhanger. Illyra's hand brushed against the pedestal crystal once more, and a surge of energy flared across the hall, illuminating the floating artifacts in a blinding silver light. Tharion's eyes widened as he whispered, "It has begun, and soon nothing will be the same." In that moment, Illyra realized that the world she knew, and the kingdom itself, was on the brink of transformation, and she and Tharion were at its very heart. The moon hung low over the lunar citadel, casting pale light across the stone walls and high towers. Illyra stood on the terrace overlooking the northern gardens, the chill night air brushing against her face. She could feel the power within her thrumming steadily, growing stronger with each heartbeat. It had awakened during the ceremony, surged again in the Hall of Ancients, and now it seemed to call to her in whispers she barely understood. Tharion stepped out beside her, his massive shadow stretching across the terrace. "The energy responds to you more strongly at night," he said quietly. "When the world is still, the magic listens more closely. You must learn to control it before it controls you." Illyra nodded, though unease stirred in her chest. She had felt the surge of power, cold, sharp, alive, but had little understanding of its limits. She wanted to be strong, to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. But fear whispered that the power might consume her if she misused it. "Then teach me," she said softly. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Tharion studied her, his stormy gray eyes unreadable. "You will be tested, Illyra, not only by magic but by those who would see you fail. The bond between us makes you visible to eyes that wish harm. You must be vigilant." Before Elira could respond, a distant cry echoed from the gardens below. Both turned toward the sound, sharp, urgent, and full of danger. A shadow moved among the hedges, swift and silent, and Elira could feel the sudden spike of fear in the air. Her power reacted instinctively, tingling through her veins like electricity. Tharian's hand fell on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "They've come," he said. "The ones who resent the bond, who fear what it may bring." "Be ready!" The figure in the garden struck suddenly, a flash of movement aimed at the northern gate. Elira's heart leapt. Without thinking, she raised her hands, feeling the magic pulse in response. Silver light flowed from her fingertips, illuminating the path before her. The shadow froze, startled by the sudden glow, and then fled deeper into the gardens. "You are stronger than you realize," Tharian said, voice low. "But this is only the beginning. Controlling your power is as much about your mind as your will." Elira's breath came in quick gasps. "I don't understand it. It feels alive, almost as if it's thinking for me." "That is because it is," Tharian replied. "The bond connects your magic to mine, and to the citadel itself. It is ancient, older than any of us. It seeks purpose, and it will find it, with or without your consent." A sudden noise from behind startled Elira. A group of cloaked figures had slipped into the garden, moving with practiced stealth. Her pulse quickened, but Tharian's presence steadied her. He stepped forward, massive and imposing, his own aura radiating power. The cloaked intruders paused, assessing him, and then advanced. "Stay behind me," he commanded, and Elira obeyed, feeling the tension between fear and courage coiling within her. The figures attacked, swift and precise. Tharian moved with uncanny speed, deflecting blows and striking with controlled force. Elira felt the magic within her flare in response, silver light dancing along the terrace as she instinctively defended herself, weaving a barrier of energy that repelled their approach. Together, they fought, Tharian with strength and skill, Elira with a growing control over her magic. Though inexperienced, her instincts were sharp, and the bond between them amplified her abilities. Each glance they shared, each subtle shift of energy, spoke of a connection beyond words. Fear, adrenaline, and something unspoken stirred between them, a delicate tension that neither could ignore. When the last figure fled into the shadows, Elira's knees trembled. The garden lay in disarray, torches flickering, shadows deep and menacing. She looked at Tharian, expecting relief, but instead saw concern etched into his face. "They will not stop," he said. "The moment your power awakens fully, all who wish to control or destroy it will come for you. You are no longer invisible." Elira swallowed hard. The reality of her new life pressed down on her like a weight. She had once believed that courage was simply enduring fear, but now she understood it was far more complicated. Courage meant standing when the world sought to crush you, facing danger without knowing the outcome, and trusting someone with both your life and your heart. "Then I will learn," she said quietly, determination threading her voice. "I will not be their pawn. I will not be afraid." Tharian's eyes softened. "Good," he murmured. "We will begin training at dawn. You will need all your strength, and more than that, your mind must be as sharp as your heart." The hours passed with uneasy quiet. Elira stayed in the Hall of Ancients, studying the floating tomes under Tharian's watchful gaze. Each scroll and crystal offered fragments of knowledge, spells of protection, wards against intrusion, and techniques to harness her power without succumbing to it. Every attempt challenged her, testing focus, patience, and resilience. Some nights she faltered, her energy surging uncontrollably and leaving her exhausted and shaken. Yet Tharian never judged. Instead, he guided, correcting, supporting, and sometimes simply observing, letting her discover limits and strengths on her own. During a brief pause in training, Elira asked, "Why did you take such a risk, bringing me so close to the magic so soon?" Tharion hesitated. The gray storm of his eyes darkened with memories he rarely shared. "Because the curse has weakened," he admitted. "It senses the bond. I cannot delay any longer. If the bond strengthens under your control, it may break the curse entirely, or it may destroy us both. There is no certainty, only risk." Elira looked at him, realizing the truth of his words. This was more than ceremony, more than alliance. It was a test of fate, of trust, of courage against a power older than the kingdom itself. And in that knowledge, she felt a strange thrill, a dangerous excitement. The next day, the palace stirred with rumors. Courtiers whispered of the Alpha King's unusual choice and of the mysterious surge of magic that had been witnessed during the night's disturbances. Some feared Elira, others envied her, and a few began plotting against her even before she had stepped fully into her role. The weight of expectation pressed on her like a storm, yet she felt stronger, sharper, and more alive than ever before. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elira stood once more on the terrace. The moonlight poured over her like a blessing, illuminating the awakening power in her veins. Tharion approached silently, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his enormous form. "You are ready for what comes next," he said softly, not as a command, but as a promise. "The trials ahead will be unlike anything you have faced. Your enemies are cunning and relentless, but you are not alone. I will not let anything harm you, not while I still draw breath." Elira's pulse quickened. The bond between them was no longer invisible or abstract. It pulsed like a living thread connecting them. Each heartbeat seemed in sync, each breath a silent affirmation of shared destiny. And in that connection she felt a flicker of something deeper, a stirring of trust, admiration, and something dangerously close to longing. But the night was far from over. From the shadows of the northern walls, the cloaked figures returned, moving faster and more deliberately than before. Elira's senses tingled, the magic responding to the threat before it even emerged from the darkness. She turned to Tharion, who nodded, eyes hardening with resolve. The attackers struck simultaneously, rushing forward with coordinated precision. Tharion met them with immense strength, blocking and deflecting their blows, while Elira's magic flared, a silver barrier flowing around them both. The attackers faltered, shocked by the intensity of her power. Elira felt a thrill of control, a confidence she had never known. And then, a sudden explosion of energy rocked the terrace, shaking the walls and sending torches flying. Elira was thrown to the ground, struggling to rise, her power flickering unpredictably. Tharion reached her in a single impossible stride, lifting her effortlessly to her feet. His eyes held both concern and admiration. "They are stronger than we anticipated," he said grimly, "and they will not stop until they succeed. We must act quickly, before the citadel itself becomes a battlefield." Elira's heart raced, but she felt a steadying force in the bond that connected them. Fear remained, but it was tempered by determination. Together, they would face whatever dangers approached, mastering the power that had chosen them both. Cliffhanger. As the attackers retreated into the darkness, Elira noticed a faint, glowing symbol etched into the garden's stone floor. One she had never seen before. It pulsed with a cold, dangerous light. Tharion's eyes widened as he whispered, "They've awakened something, and it's far older than any of us." In that moment, Elira realized the next challenge would not only test her magic, but the bond that tied her fate to the giant Alpha King. The first light of dawn crept over the lunar citadel, pale and ghostly, illuminating the torn gardens and shattered stone where the previous night's skirmish had unfolded. Elira stood at the edge of the northern terrace, her hair tossed by the wind, her fingers trembling slightly from the residual energy of her power. The bond with Tharion pulsed through her, steady and strong, and yet she knew the ultimate test had yet to come. Tharion stepped beside her, his massive form casting a long shadow over the terrace. His gray eyes were stormy, unreadable, but beneath the surface, there was a warmth reserved for no one else. "They've awakened the sigil," he said, voice low. "It is older than the citadel itself, older than the kingdoms, and it seeks to claim power through those who are unprepared." Elira's stomach clenched. The glowing symbol she had seen etched into the garden floor had not faded. Instead, it pulsed with a life of its own, emitting tendrils of silver light that seemed to reach for her, for Tharion, for the citadel itself. "What do we do?" she asked, voice trembling but determined. "We face it," he said simply. "Together. The bond between us strengthens your power, Elira. Without it, the sigil will consume you, or destroy everything in its path." She nodded, feeling the bond thrumming like a living heartbeat. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been replaced by resolve. She had learned in the past days that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And now she would need every ounce of that courage. They descended into the gardens, the silver light of the sigil growing brighter with each step. Shadows shifted unnaturally around them, and the air crackled with energy. Elira raised her hands instinctively, letting the power within her flow outward, shaping it with the guidance of Tharion's steady presence. The magic responded, forming a protective barrier around them, repelling the creeping tendrils of light that sought to touch them. The sigil pulsed faster, brighter, almost alive in its anger. Tharion placed his hand on Elira's shoulder. "Focus," he urged. "Do not let fear control you. Let the bond guide your strength." Elira closed her eyes, letting the pulse of the magic course through her. She could feel Tharion's own energy intertwining with hers, steady, firm, like a lifeline. The power of the citadel flowed into them both, ancient and vast, whispering secrets older than memory. She felt a surge of understanding, a realization that the magic was not a weapon to wield blindly, but a force to harmonize, to guide, to protect. Opening her eyes, she raised her hands toward the sigil. The silver tendrils recoiled slightly, then surged again. Tharion stepped forward, adding his strength to hers, the bond amplifying their power, forming a radiant wave of energy that struck the sigil head-on. The light flared, blinding in its intensity, and the ground shook as if the very earth recognized the confrontation. Elira felt the force of the sigil pressing against her, testing her resolve. Doubts flashed in her mind, fear of failure, fear of losing control, fear of harming Tharion. But the bond anchored her, a tether to courage and trust. She drew a deep breath and let the power flow freely, not as a weapon, but as a reflection of herself and the bond they shared. The sigil shrieked, a sound like the clash of stars, and then split, a fracturing of light that sent shards of silver energy spiraling into the sky. Elira's knees threatened to buckle, but Tharion's strong hand steadied her. Together they forced the sigil to collapse, its ancient energy absorbed into the bond that connected them. The gardens grew quiet once more, the shadows retreating, the air settling. Elira sank to her knees, exhausted, trembling from the effort. Tharion knelt beside her, resting a hand over hers. "You did it," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and pride. "You controlled the magic, and you survived." She looked up at him, the dawn light catching the storm in his eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "Together." He smiled, the first true, gentle smile she had seen. "Yes, together." For a moment, silence reigned. Then slowly, The first courtiers began to emerge from the shadows of the citadel, witnessing the aftermath. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The sigil had been quelled, the magic controlled, the impossible achieved. Elira, once invisible and overlooked, stood at the center of the citadel, her power and courage acknowledged by all. But the moment was not about accolades. It was about transformation. Elira felt it in her bones, in the rhythm of the bond, in the steady presence of Tharion beside her. She was no longer the timid girl who had sat alone at the ceremony. She was part of something greater, a force of strength and change, bound by magic and trust to the Alpha King who had recognized her worth. Tharion extended his hand, not as a command, but as an invitation. Elira took it, feeling the bond pulse stronger than ever. She had learned that power without control was chaos, and that courage without connection was lonely. Together they had forged balance, strength, and trust. "You've changed everything," Tharion said quietly. "Not just for yourself, but for the citadel, for the kingdom, for everyone who thought the bond was mere tradition. You've made it real." Elira smiled faintly, the weight of exhaustion lifting, replaced by something warmer. "I only followed where it led," she said. "And you were there." Tharion's eyes softened. "I was," he said. "And I always will be." The sun rose higher, bathing the citadel in golden light. Shadows of fear, doubt, and uncertainty faded with it. Elira felt the pulse of magic calm, now steady and harmonized, flowing through her veins with a quiet certainty. The bond between her and Tharion had not only survived the trial, it had strengthened, unbreakable, a source of both power and protection. And yet, beyond the gardens, beyond the citadel walls, Elira knew the world was vast, full of challenges and mysteries. But she no longer faced it alone. She had power, purpose, and an unshakable bond with the one who had believed in her from the start. As they walked back toward the citadel side by side, Elira realized the truth she had been fearing and hoping for in equal measure. The bond was not just about magic or duty. It was about connection, trust, and something far older than either of them had known, a shared destiny written in the language of stars and shadows. They reached the ceremonial hall, now quiet and empty, and paused at the steps. Tharion looked down at her, his gaze deep and unwavering. "You've earned your place," he said, "not because of power or lineage or ceremony, but because of who you are." Elira met his eyes, her own reflecting both exhaustion and triumph. "And you've earned mine," she said softly. A gentle wind swept through the hall, carrying with it the faint echo of the twin moons and the lingering magic of the citadel. Elira felt it pulse through her one last time, a reminder of everything they had faced, overcome, and created together. The bond between them, once tentative and untested, now glowed with quiet, unwavering strength. It was a bond of trust, courage, and love, the kind that could weather storms, face ancient curses, and endure the passage of time itself. Tharion extended his hand once more, this time with no ceremony, no words, only an unspoken promise. Elira took it, her fingers closing around his, and together they stood on the steps of the citadel, looking out over the kingdom they had saved, the magic they had tamed, and the destiny they had forged. For the first time in her life, Elira felt wholly seen, wholly strong, and wholly alive. The mating ceremony had marked her, the bond had awakened her, and the trials had transformed her. She was no longer invisible, no longer powerless, no longer alone. And beside her, the giant Alpha King, Tharion, the one who had seen her worth when no one else had, stood as her equal, her protector, and her companion in a destiny far larger than either of them had imagined. The citadel, the gardens, the twin moons, all bore witness to a bond that had begun with a single command: act like you're mine, and had grown into something far greater: trust, courage, and the quiet promise of love that could endure all trials. Elira took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the magic and the bond in perfect harmony. She looked at Therion, and for the first time, fear was replaced entirely by hope. Whatever the future held, the challenges, the enemies, the unknown, they would face it together. And in that unity, they found strength, purpose, and the first true glimpse of peace. The twin moons shone high above the citadel, silver light cascading over their joined hands. In that light, Elira understood that the mating ceremony had not been the beginning. It had been the awakening. And now, at last, they were ready to meet whatever destiny awaited.